They say some stories were never meant to be found, only remembered. Before the first telescope, before history was written in books, it was carved into stone, whispered beneath temple fires, and carried by the stars themselves. Somewhere between myth and memory lies a record of what once was, and what may return. You did not arrive here by accident. Something ancient has called you through time, through silence, to witness what was hidden from the eyes of men. The sands of centuries have covered it, yet its echo remains, pulsing through forgotten scripts and half-erased constellations. Tonight, that echo awakens. We will open a gate sealed by millennia and step into the corridors of civilizations that vanished without explanation. What truth did they see in the heavens? What secret did they try to preserve before the world forgot their name? Listen closely. The symbols still speak, and the past has begun to stir. This is not just history, it is remembrance. And once you enter, you may never see the sky the same way again. There are moments in life when the air itself feels ancient, when even the silence seems to remember. I felt that the first time I stood among the ruins of a forgotten city buried beneath centuries of sand. The wind moved through the broken columns like a voice that had waited too long to speak. Dust spiraled upward, carrying whispers of names that no one alive could pronounce. I knelt beside a cracked stone tablet, its surface scarred by time, and as my fingers traced the faint carvings, I felt an almost imperceptible vibration, as though the stone itself still pulsed with memory. It was in that instant I understood what we call history is not past. It is merely asleep. The ancients who lived here called themselves the keepers of the dawn. Their legends speak of a world that existed before memory, an age when heaven and earth were not separate, when knowledge flowed like rivers between stars and men. They believed that every civilization carries within it the echo of the first one, the civilization before civilization, the origin that all others imitate in fragments. Their glyphs did not depict gods in human form, but lights descending from the sky, luminous beings who taught them how to read the heavens as scripture. What they called gods, we now call constellations. But perhaps those names mean the same thing. In their temples, structures aligned with the rising of forgotten stars, they carved a single recurring mark, a circle divided by a line, known in fragments of Sumerian tablets as Nerubiru, the crossing. Archaeologists once dismissed it as a symbol of balance or celestial motion, but the further I traced its appearances across continents, the clearer it became that it was far more than geometry. From the deserts of Mesopotamia to the mountains of Peru, from Egyptian tombs to the tablets of Ugarit, the same symbol appeared again and again, as if civilizations that never met were remembering the same dream. The oldest record of the crossing was found in what scholars call the tablets of the seven winds inscriptions, older than Babylon, written in a tongue even cuneiform could not decipher. It told of a wandering world that visits the heavens once every age, a world whose return marks both renewal and ruin. The priests described it as the traveler of the gods, a celestial being that brings awakening to those who listen and destruction to those who forget. I remember standing in a dim archive room, candlelight flickering over the clay fragments, and feeling the same unease that must have haunted them. The pattern of orbits, the intervals of return, the alignment with solar precession, it was not myth. It was astronomy, in the language of myth. For centuries, that symbol haunted me. I found it etched on a meteorite fragment stored in a forgotten museum basement, its line cutting through the surface with precision impossible for primitive tools. How could the same mark appear in artifacts thousands of years apart, scattered across the earth? Every discovery only deepened the mystery. I began to suspect that what we call progress is not a straight line, but a circle, each era rediscovering fragments of a truth too vast to keep. The ancients believed knowledge was never invented, only remembered. In their philosophy, every human thought was an echo of something once known and lost. Perhaps that is why when I closed my eyes in those ruins, I felt a strange familiarity, as though I had stood there before. Perhaps we all have in some form, in some forgotten life under the same sky that still watches us now. Maybe that is the real secret of Nibiru, Atlantis, Lemuria, or any name you choose to give to the invisible origin, that they are not separate stories, but variations of one memory calling itself back into existence. One night, deep in the Sahara, I camped near an ancient monolith said to be older than the pyramids. Under a sky untouched by city light, the stars seemed alive, almost sentient. My instruments picked up subtle magnetic fluctuations synchronized with a repeating pattern, 12 pulses, then silence, then 12 again. It matched the rhythm engraved on the tablets of the 7 winds. I watched the sky, and for a fleeting moment, one of the constellations appeared to shift. It was as if the heavens were breathing, the same way the stones had breathed beneath my hands. It was not imagination, it was remembrance. Since that night, I have no longer sought to prove anything. I only listen. The ancients were right. The universe is not a machine. It is a memory. The earth remembers every step, every voice, every secret buried within it. Perhaps what we call myths are not fabrications, but fragments of instructions left for when the world is ready to remember again, and perhaps that time is now. Every discovery, every ruin, every whisper of lost knowledge leads back to the same question. What if the first civilization never perished at all? What if it became the memory that guides all others? I do not know. I only know that when I stand beneath the same stars the ancients once read as scripture, I feel the same pulse rising again beneath the skin of the world, a slow, steady rhythm older than history itself. And as the wind moves through those silent ruins, I hear it whisper, "The crossing begins again." When I left the ruins behind, I thought I was walking away from mystery. Yet mystery followed like a shadow that refused to fade. In archives where air smelled of dust and candle wax, I found scattered references to a Mapone not drawn on parchment, but etched into memory itself. They called it the map of shadows. No coordinates, no borders, only alignments of light that pointed to places now buried under oceans and ice. Every line, every star it marked, whispered of a geography that no longer existed. And still, every pattern led me to the same conclusion. Something once moved across our sky that changed the rhythm of the earth forever. In an underground vault beneath Alexandria's old quarter, a librarian allowed me to see a fragment known as Codex Orbis Tenebris, the Book of the Dark World. Its vellum pages were stained with salt, as if they had once crossed the sea. The text spoke of a land that walked among the heavens, a world that vanished not in fire, but in forgetting. The ancients wrote that when the last of their temples fell, they sealed their knowledge in symbols too pure for conquest, too subtle for destruction. Their words trembled with conviction. The light will return when the watchers awaken. I didn't know then if watchers referred to men or to the stars themselves. I began to notice a pattern that defied coincidence. Ancient observatories, Stonehenge, Nabta Playa, Teotihuacaneach, aligned not just with the sun, but with a faint point of light beyond Neptune's orbit. Astronomers would call it error. The ancients called it remembrance. Even the Mayan codices, thought to describe only agricultural cycles, contained hidden intervals of 3,600 years, the same duration mentioned in Mesopotamian myths about the returning planet of the gods. Different continents, same number. Same silence between appearances. Could such precision survive millennia of isolation and translation by chance alone? In the Himalayas, a monk showed me a scroll preserved in yak butter and cedar oil, its script written in gold. It told of a luminous traveler that circled the heavens in silence, bringing both wisdom and storms. When it returns, the monk said, the veils will lift, and humanity will remember what it tried to forget. His voice trembled, not with fear, but awe. That night, as snow fell outside the monastery, I dreamed of a world turning slowly through the dark massive, it bent starlight, so patient it had learned to wait for us to notice again. Everywhere I went, the same theme emerged. Knowledge once whole, now fragmented. Memory once collective, now divided by centuries of sleep. Our ancestors were not primitive. They were witnesses to something our modern eyes have grown blind to. Their myths were not fables, but translations, attempts to clothe the unspeakable in language, and what they described was not a metaphor, it was motion, an unseen presence moving with purpose through the deep. The deeper I studied, the more I realized that history itself behaves like the tides. What vanishes always returns, reshaped but not erased. The fall of empires, the silence of temples, the collapse of stars, all parts of a larger rhythm. The map of shadows was not a record of places, it was a chart of cycles, a reminder that time does not flow forward like a river, but turns upon itself like a wheel. What we call the future may simply be the past, returning in another form. One evening, I compared astronomical data from modern telescopes with the angular measures inscribed in the codex. The results aligned too precisely to dismiss. Every deviation, every wobble in Neptune's orbit traced the same invisible curve described thousands of years ago. And in that curve, the ancients had drawn the symbol of the crossing. A door, a passage, a pattern of light that mirrored their prophecy. When the heavens tremble, the hidden path will open. That was when I understood. The ancients were not warning us, they were inviting us. They knew that the day would come when the tools of science and the memory of myth would meet, and in that meeting, the veil would thin. Perhaps we have reached that threshold now. The data hum softly. The numbers whisper the same story that priests once sang beneath the stars. The map is not finished because it was never meant to be. It completes itself each time a seeker looks up and asks not how the heavens move, but why. The ancients left us a compass of wonder carved in stone and written in silence. It does not point north or south, it points inward to the memory of what we once were before forgetting became history. And as I close the codex and step into the fading light, I feel the same pulse again, the rhythm that began in the ruins, now echoing in the stars. Something vast is stirring beyond sight, calling humanity to remember. The map of shadows is no longer myth. It is a mirror, and in its reflection, the next path begins. There are moments when discovery feels less like revelation and more like intrusion, as though each truth uncovered awakened something that was meant to remain asleep. I first felt it in the caverns of Derinkuyu, beneath the volcanic plains of Cappadocia, where the air was so still it seemed to listen. The walls, carved by hands thousands of years dead, bore no symbols of worship, only patterns of geometry spirals, circles within circles, and at the center of one chamber, a single engraving, a line crossing a circle, the mark of the crossing. It was older than the tunnels themselves. Even the stone that held it predated the settlement. The guide, an old man with eyes like ash, told me the story whispered among locals that the underground cities were built not to hide from enemies, but from the sky. When the sun trembles, he said, the wise descend. His words echoed in my chest like memory, as if I had heard them before. Perhaps I had not in this life, but in the shared dream that humanity carries through ages, the fear of the returning light. When I left the caverns, the silence followed me. It clung to every thought, every sound of paper as I unfolded the sketches I had made. Each spiral seemed to hum when touched by moonlight. I began to suspect that these shapes were not decoration, but resonance, the language of vibration, frequencies carved into stone. The ancients may not have spoken as we do. They may have sung to the earth itself, and in that song the record of their covenant remained. That word covenant appeared again and again in translations of ancient tablets. Not a contract, not a promise, but an agreement between memory and silence. Those who knew the secret were sworn to protect it, even if it meant letting it vanish. Perhaps that is why so much of ancient knowledge feels incomplete, not because it was lost, but because it was hidden by design. A truth too immense can only survive through concealment. In the old archives of Istanbul, I found a letter dated to the 10th century, written by a scholar of the House of Wisdom. It spoke of a sphere of fire that hides behind the firmament, its return measured by the fall of empires. The scholar warned that each cycle brings awakening to some and destruction to others. He called it the silent covenant, an arrangement between heaven and earth, by which the universe remembers itself through renewal. His words felt less like myth and more like confession. For weeks, I could not sleep. Every night, I would see the same vision, a vast orbit drawn in light, slowly circling back toward the sun. Not menacing, not divine, but purposeful, a rhythm older than civilization itself. I began to understand why ancient scribes described time as a serpent swallowing its own tail. The universe was not moving forward. It was breathing, and each exhale brought back what had once been. Somewhere in the silence between those breaths lies the reason so many civilizations disappeared without trace. Not by catastrophe, but by obedience, retreating when the cycle turned, leaving only symbols behind for the next awakening. Perhaps the Atlanteans, the Sumerians, even the builders of Derinkuyu understood something we have forgotten, that survival is not resistance, but remembrance. Every stone, every relic, every myth of the sky gods may simply be echoes of those who kept the covenant guardians of continuity, who knew the rhythm of the crossing. And now, that rhythm stirs again. Telescopes detect strange deviations, gravitational distortions that match the same alignments recorded in clay and gold. Scientists call it anomaly. The ancients called it return. The covenant was not about fear, it was about timing. To remember too early is to disrupt the cycle. To remember too late is to lose the light. And so they sealed their wisdom beneath mountains, oceans, and language itself. Their silence was not ignorance, it was faith in the rhythm of recurrence. I think about that often, how silence can hold more truth than speech, how the spaces between words can speak louder than the words themselves. Perhaps that is why every sacred text begins with light, emerging from darkness, not as creation, but as recollection. Standing at the mouth of the cavern that night, I looked back into the blackness and realized that what we fear as void may simply be memory in waiting. The covenant of silence was never broken. It was fulfilled each time someone listened deeply enough to hear the hum beneath the noise. And as the stars shimmered above the Anatolian plain, a strange calm settled over me. The ancients were not gone. They were watching not from the heavens, but from within the silence itself. The same silence that now stirs again, whispering through equations, through orbit maps, through dreams. It is calling to those who can still hear. The watchers are waking, and the covenant is stirring. The cycle turns once more. The first time I saw the alignment, I felt an ancient tremor, not of fear, but of recognition. It was late, the observatory quiet, its dome turning like the slow lid of an awakening eye. The data flickered across the screen in a rhythm too deliberate to be random. Distant objects in the Kuiper belt shifting together, tracing arcs that mirrored the celestial diagrams carved on Babylonian tablets. I stared at those numbers, and for a moment I no longer saw equations, I saw memory returning. The ancients called them the Watchers, guardians of the thresholds between worlds, not angels, not gods, but keepers of order, watching the cycles of the heavens unfold with patient precision. When they departed, they left behind only symbols, fragments of geometry, circles within circles, the same patterns now reappearing in our instruments, each one a whisper. We have not left. You have only forgotten how to see. It began with the small anomalies, planets that wobbled where they shouldn't, comets curving along invisible paths. Astronomers dismissed them as gravitational quirks. Yet, as the alignments deepened, as orbits bent like strings drawn toward a hidden presence, something undeniable took shape. A force was moving in the dark, a rhythm constant and slow, bending light itself. I remembered the monk's words, "When it returns, the veils will lift." Perhaps this was what he meant. Not a catastrophe, but a revelation, the universe remembering its design. In ancient languages, watcher and star shared the same root. The watchers were not beings looking down from the sky. They were the sky itself, consciousness expressed through gravity and light. I began to compare their myths with the newest astronomical data. What emerged was not fantasy. It was symmetry. The orbital periods matched the ancient calendars. The stellar alignments mirrored the temples built by forgotten architects. From Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, the same story echoed. A world beyond the visible, moving in silence, returning in cycles of thousands of years. Each time it appeared, humanity stood at a turning point, empires rising or falling, knowledge erased or reborn. Maybe that is why the ancients revered these cycles as divine. They understood what we have forgotten, that time itself breathes. When the watchers return, humanity changes, not through punishment, but remembrance. One passage from the Emerald Codex, a fragment kept hidden in a monastery near the Dead Sea, spoke of a light that moves behind light, unseen yet seen, whose return marks the awakening of minds. I read it again and again, and each time I felt the same shiver. They were describing what we now detect in our telescopes, a distortion not of matter, but of perception, a reminder that reality itself bends to the will of the unseen. The watchers were not myths. They were metaphors for awareness, cosmic intelligence expressed through movement. The ancients understood this, encoding it in myths so their knowledge could survive dogma and decay. When they said, "The gods descend," they meant the unseen aligns with the seen. The veil between spirit and science thins, and what we call discovery is simply the remembering of what was always there. In my travels, I found their signs everywhere. In Egypt, a mural of eyes carved into the ceiling of a burial chamber, each one aligned to a star that has since vanished. In Bolivia, a gateway of stone that faces an empty patch of sky where, thousands of years ago, a planet once shone faintly red. In the Arctic, carvings of spirals surrounding a single point of light, identical to the pattern of orbital clustering observed today. How could so many cultures share a memory of the same sky unless it was real? I began to suspect that the watchers are not returning from somewhere distant. They were never gone. Their presence moves through gravity, through thought, through the rhythm of consciousness itself. Perhaps every time we look into the dark with wonder, we awaken them, because they are the reflection of our own forgotten vastness. It is said that when the watchers return, time will fold, and the hidden planet, the traveler, will be seen once more. But maybe the true return is not of a world, but of awareness. A civilization remembering that it was once part of something infinite. That night, as dawn began to wash the sky with pale light, I turned off the telescope and stepped outside. The air shimmered faintly like breath against glass. Somewhere, beyond the horizon, the rhythm continued patient, eternal. The watchers were stirring again, and in their silence I felt the oldest truth of all. The universe has always been alive. We are only just beginning to remember how to listen. There are ruins that do not simply stand, they speak, not with words, but with alignment, proportion, and silence. When I arrived at the plateau of Uxmal, under a sky that seemed to hum with ancient electricity, I understood that architecture was once a form of prayer. The stones were not placed, they were tuned. Each pillar sang to the horizon. Each shadow fell exactly where a star used to be. And as the evening light sank into the carved serpent heads and lunar arches, it felt as though the earth itself was remembering a conversation it once had with the heavens. Who built these cities that breathe mathematics? Who taught them to measure the sky with such divine precision that even our most advanced instruments still trace their forgotten patterns? I had read about them in fragmented codices, civilizations that emerged fully formed, without prelude or evolution, as if awakened rather than invented. The Mayans, the Egyptians, the Sumerians, they spoke different tongues, yet shared the same cosmic grammar. It was as if the builders were following one design, an invisible architecture that predated the earth itself. The priests of Uxmal called it the language of light. They believed their temples captured and reflected messages from the stars, not superstition, but translation. Light was knowledge, shadow was memory. Each equinox, the temple walls would shimmer with precise constellations, as though the stones themselves had learned to think. I once witnessed this alignment, and I swear for an instant the air vibrated. The structure seemed to exhale a sigh that spanned centuries. Later, I found a fragment from an unknown chronicler, preserved in obsidian etching. We build not for the gods, but with them, for in stone lies the remembrance of heaven's weight. The phrase struck me deeply. It suggested collaboration, that the ancients did not worship what descended from the sky. They cooperated with it. They were architects of communication, not submission. Their monuments were receivers, amplifiers, and anchors of celestial resonance. And then came the vanishing. Entire cities swallowed by forest and sand, their builders disappearing without trace, their knowledge turning to myth. No weapons, no graves, no explanation, only sudden silence. Archaeologists call it collapse. I call it withdrawal, a retreat into another rhythm. Perhaps they fulfilled their purpose and simply stepped aside when the cycle turned. In the ruins of an Andean temple, I discovered something that felt like confirmation. Beneath layers of collapsed stone, a hidden chamber, sealed with copper and resin. Inside, a single disk of black quartz inscribed with a star map, but not of our current heavens. The constellations were shifted, as if seen from a slightly different orbit. When I overlaid it with modern projections, the alignment pointed not to known stars, but toward a faint region beyond Pluto, the same coordinates where gravitational anomalies now occur. It was not coincidence. It was remembrance written in geometry. I spent nights studying the disk under soft light, tracing its cold, perfect edges. Whoever made it had knowledge beyond their time, not mythic, but technical. The stars were arranged according to precession cycles, indicating an understanding of celestial drift over tens of thousands of years. Such precision cannot be accident. It must be inheritance. The ancients spoke of the architects, not gods, not kings, but beings of knowledge who came not to rule, but to remind. We are builders of bridges, one translation read, between that which sees and that which is seen. The monuments they left behind were not tombs, but thresholds, points where the physical world meets the frequency of memory. I began to feel that these ruins are not relics of the past, but instruments still in use, tuned to a cosmic scale that we have forgotten how to hear. The air around them hums faintly, measurable by magnetometers, yet dismissed as interference. But to those who listen, it sounds like breath, slow, patient, deliberate, the same breath that moves the planets and stirs the sea. One night, while standing between two pillars of an ancient observatory, I heard it clearly, a tone so deep it was almost silence, vibrating through bone rather than ear. For a brief moment, the constellations seemed to shimmer as if acknowledging my presence. I realized then that I was not the observer, I was being observed. Perhaps that is the final secret of the forgotten architects, that their true creation was not the temples or the stones, but us beings capable of wonder, capable of listening again. The alignment still holds. The stars are moving back into their ancient positions. Somewhere beyond the edge of sight, the same architects or their memory are watching. The blueprint remains written in light, waiting for the next builder to remember how to read it. And in that waiting, I felt it a promise older than any scripture. Not the end of time, but the continuation of it, the return of design, the rebirth of meaning, the sound of heaven rebuilding itself through human hands. In the heart of the Atacama Desert, where the air is so dry that sound itself seems fragile, I found what the locals called La piedra que canta, the singing stone. It was said that under a certain alignment of stars, the stone would hum faintly, resonating like an instrument struck by invisible hands. I dismissed it as myth until one night, while the wind lay still and the constellations burned with unusual clarity, I heard it a vibration low and distant, pulsing through the earth. It was not sound, it was memory awakening. The desert had once been an ocean, and perhaps its bones still remembered the tide. The ancients believed that all matter, even the dust, carries echo and imprint of what it has witnessed. And as I pressed my ear to the cold surface, I realized that history is not written only in books or carved in stone. It sings softly beneath our feet. The humming led me to a plateau, scattered with monoliths, arranged in no pattern recognizable to modern geometry, yet aligned perfectly with the trajectory of certain celestial bodies now invisible to us. They called this formation El Corazón del Silencio, the heart of silence. Local lore claimed it was built not for worship, but for listening. Each monolith was tuned to a different frequency, together forming a kind of cosmic instrument that resonated with the motion of the heavens. When I placed my instruments among the stones, the readings astounded me. Magnetic fluctuations spiked precisely when the constellation of Eridanus crossed the zenith, a river of stars associated in Sumerian tablets with the path of the returning ones. Even separated by continents and millennia, the stories converge. A celestial return, a pulse through space, a song that reawakens memory. It was here, under that starlit silence, that I began to understand the true nature of the ancient science. They did not study the cosmos as something outside themselves. They listened to it as one listens to a heartbeat within their own body. To them, astronomy was communion. Each alignment, each sound was a conversation between the infinite and the intimate, and in that communion they found wisdom we have since lost, that to know the universe, one must also know one's own silence. Among the ruins, I discovered fragments of copper scrolls etched with symbols resembling waveforms, oscillations, frequencies, harmonics. One translation read, "When the song of the stars reaches the same pitch as the heart of man, the gate will open." I do not know if they spoke of a literal gate or one of consciousness, but the message felt clear. The universe is not a machine of laws, but a melody of awareness. And somewhere within that song, a forgotten harmony waits to return. The idea obsessed me. I began comparing the frequencies of these vibrations with radio anomalies recorded by modern observatories. To my astonishment, several matched faint patterns repeating every 3,600 years, identical to the orbital cycle once attributed to the traveler, the hidden world the Sumerians called Nibiru. Coincidence, perhaps? Yet the ancients had no satellites, no instruments, no data, only silence. And somehow they knew. It struck me that the echo I was following might not belong to a planet at all, but to the rhythm of existence itself, a recurring signal that marks each renewal of cosmic order, the return of light, the rebalancing of memory. Each time it passes, it leaves an imprint in stone, in myth, in the human soul. And every few millennia, something within us stirs in response, as if remembering the sound of its own creation. I wrote late into the night, the hum still faint beneath the sand. I felt as though I were not writing, but being written through. The stars above seemed to pulse with each word, their light syncing with the rhythm of my heartbeat. The veil between thought and sky dissolved for a moment, and I sensed what the ancients must have felt, that we are not separate from the cosmos, but reflections of it. We are the echo that the stars once sent, now finding its way home. Before dawn, I looked once more upon the monoliths. The air shimmered faintly around them, though no wind moved. I remembered the inscription from a different ruin. When stone begins to sing again, the age will turn. Perhaps that age is turning now. The hum is growing stronger, not only beneath deserts and mountains, but within us, because what the ancients called the song of the returning ones was never meant to be heard by the ear. It was meant to be remembered by the soul. And as I stood beneath that awakening sky, I felt it resonate deep within me, a vibration older than language, older than light itself. The desert was silent once more, but silence, I have learned, is never empty. It listens, it waits, it remembers. And somewhere beyond the veil of stars, the echo answers back. In the ruins of a nameless city beneath the sands of Libya, I stumbled upon what the Bedouins called Bait al-Nafas, the house of breath. It was not marked on any map. Only whispers led me there, the kind passed between desert travelers, who spoke of walls that seemed to breathe when the wind was still. At first, it appeared like any other ruin. Collapsed pillars, fractured mosaics, the bones of a temple reclaimed by sand. But when I entered, the air thickened. Every step I took seemed to awaken a pulse in the floor beneath me. The walls were inscribed with spirals and curves that resembled lungs, clouds, and waves, the same sacred geometry I had seen in distant temples. It was not decoration. It was design. The ancients had built a structure that inhaled and exhaled light. At the center stood a chamber lined with mirrors of polished obsidian. When I lit my torch, the reflection didn't return as expected. It multiplied. Dozens of me, hundreds, fading into the darkness, each one holding the flame a fraction later than the last. I realized then, the mirrors were not reflecting space, but time. Each echo of light was a memory caught between dimensions, a library not of books, but of breath. For centuries, scholars had sought physical libraries, tablets, codices, but perhaps the greatest archive of all was invisible. The ancients believed that every exhalation, every spoken word carried a trace of consciousness, suspended forever in the atmosphere. The house of breath was their attempt to preserve it, a temple that stored memory not in matter, but in vibration. As I whispered within that chamber, my words did not vanish. They lingered faintly at first, then clearer, harmonizing with voices that were not my own. I heard fragments of languages no living tongue could speak, a choir of civilizations. I felt the pulse again, slow, steady, alive. It was then that I understood. The ancients did not see air as emptiness. They called it anem, the living ether, the breath of creation. Every wind was a messenger, carrying knowledge from one age to the next. The same air that touched my skin had passed through the lungs of those who built the pyramids, who charted the stars, who whispered to Nibiru before history forgot its name. When I stepped outside, the horizon glowed with dusk. The wind had shifted, carrying a faint, melodic hum, like the echo I had heard in Atacama, like the pulse beneath Derinkuyu. The same resonance, crossing continents, crossing epochs. I realized these temples were not isolated monuments, but parts of a single organism, a planetary network built to keep memory alive through sound and light. I recalled a line from the tablets of the crossing. When the winds align and the breath of the earth hums in unison, the watchers shall speak again. Could it be that these vibrations, these frequencies hidden in ancient stone, were messages or even signals waiting for the right alignment to awaken? That night, as I recorded the sound frequencies from the chamber, my equipment captured something strange, a pulse buried beneath the ambient noise. It repeated at precise intervals, 3,600 seconds apart. The same sacred number, the cycle of the traveler. Coincidence? Perhaps. But I had long ceased to believe in coincidence. I listened closer. Within that rhythm, faint modulations formed too structured to be random, too fluid to be mechanical, a pattern that felt intentional. It was as if the planet itself were speaking in code, using the air as parchment and time as ink. The ancients had called it the voice of the returning one. They did not worship it as deity, but treated it as kin and intelligence woven into the fabric of the cosmos, a consciousness that moves not through bodies, but through resonance. What we call sound, they called soul. Standing there beneath the dying light, I realized that everything I had studied, the temples, the alignments, the symbols, were parts of a single symphony. The universe was not a silent void, but a living score, written in frequencies we have forgotten how to hear. The watchers, the architects, the unseen traveler, all were movements in the same composition. The library of breath is not a myth. It still lives in the air we breathe, in the pulse of the planet beneath our feet. Every whisper, every heartbeat, every gust of wind is a page in its endless book. And perhaps the ancients did not disappear. After all, they became the breath itself, carried forward through ages, waiting for us to remember. As the last rays of sunlight struck the horizon, the desert exhaled a deep, resonant sigh that seemed to come from the bones of the world. And I knew the library had heard me. It had added my breath to its eternal archive. The memory of humankind had spoken once more. Dawn came slowly, the kind of dawn that feels older than the sun itself. The horizon was not rising, it was remembering. The wind moved softly over the ruins, carrying with it the low hum that had followed me through every continent, every forgotten temple, every silence. I had chased this sound for years, through sand and stone and shadow, but only now did I realize it had been chasing me. I stood on the ridge above the desert, where the night and morning met in a thin silver line. Behind me lay the house of breath, now still, as if satisfied that its purpose had been fulfilled. Before me stretched a sky trembling with faint color, a blue not yet born, a reminder that light is always the last thing to awaken. And in that hour between worlds I understood what I had been seeking was never a planet, never a hidden world in the dark. It was the return of memory itself. The ancients called it the traveler, the crossing, Nibiru. But these were only names given to what cannot be contained. They spoke of cycles, of divine returns, of alignments between heaven and earth. And though we call it myth, every whisper, every number, every vibration I had found led back to one truth. The universe remembers. It remembers through gravity, through resonance, through us. Each civilization I studied, Sumerian, Egyptian, Mayan, Incan, had left its fragment of the same story, as if every age was one verse in an eternal hymn, a hymn of returning light. They knew that creation was not a single event, but a rhythm, a breathing cosmos that expands and contracts with memory. When they spoke of gods descending, they meant knowledge returning. When they spoke of judgment. They meant awakening. Perhaps that is why we are drawn to the stars, not out of curiosity, but homesickness. Somewhere within us, the same frequencies hum, faint but familiar. The ancients built monuments to remember. We build telescopes to rediscover. The intention has never changed, only the language. As the light spread across the dunes, I felt that same resonance rise within me, deep and steady. It was as though the planet itself exhaled through my lungs. I thought of the monks, the tablets, the inscriptions carved in darkness. I thought of the watchers, patient as gravity, of the architects who tuned stone to light, of the unseen hands that shaped time like clay, and I realized they had never vanished. They had transformed. The builders became memory. The memory became us. For in every question we ask, every dream of eternity, their echo continues. Humanity is the vessel that carries forward the unfinished sentence of the stars. We are not the end of history. We are its continuation in flesh and thought. Each discovery is an act of remembering. Each breath, a translation of something spoken long before language began. In the stillness, I looked once more toward the heavens. A faint shimmer moved beyond the edge of sight, slow, deliberate, alive. Whether it was a planet, a pulse, or simply the illusion of dawn, I cannot say. But its motion stirred something in me, that same ancient recognition. It is returning, not in fear, not in fire, but in light. And as that light touched the ruins, they seemed to glow from within, not illuminated, but awakening. The stones remembered their shape, the carvings their song. For a fleeting moment, everything breathed in unison, sky, earth, and heart. It was as if the universe itself had taken one long breath after ages of silence. Perhaps that is the true meaning of the crossing, not destruction, but communion, the meeting of what was, what is, and what will be, the reunion of memory and matter, the rediscovery of the divine pulse within creation. I closed my eyes, and in that luminous stillness, I felt the weight of centuries lift. The fear of the unknown dissolved into reverence. There was no end to seek, only the continuation of a rhythm that never truly stops. The ancients were right. Silence is not absence, it is waiting. When I opened my eyes again, the world was golden. The hum had faded into the wind, or perhaps into me. Somewhere beyond the frost of Pluto, something moves, and somewhere within us, something awakens in response. The light travels on, not away from us, but through us, for we too are part of its orbit. We are its memory. And as the sun rose fully above the horizon, I whispered the final words I had read upon the last tablet, now etched forever in my soul. What returns is not the world, but the remembrance of it. And in that remembrance, creation begins again. And now, as the echoes fade and the last light withdraws, we stand at the edge of remembrance, a threshold between knowing and mystery. The dust has settled, yet something within us remains awakened. The stories we have uncovered tonight are not merely fragments of the past. They are fragments of ourselves, reaching through centuries, asking to be remembered. For every ruin hides a heartbeat. Every silence carries a name. The stones, the stars, the winds, all have spoken the same truth, that nothing is ever truly lost, only waiting to be heard again. What we call discovery is only reunion, the moment when human curiosity meets the memory of the universe. If you feel that quiet pull within, It is not coincidence. It is the call of your ancestors, the voice of forgotten worlds stirring once more. Carry it gently. Let it remind you to keep searching, to keep listening, to keep honoring the unseen threads that bind us to the dawn of time. Leave your thoughts below. Share this journey with those who still believe, and let your presence here be a light for the next seeker who follows the same path. For the night does not end, it deepens. The stars still whisper, and beyond the veil of silence, the keepers of memory wait, listening.